Hello, everyone, and welcome to Management Q's webinar series on the art of effective leadership. Today's session provides a snapshot of the leadership skills that help managers excel in their role. I'm Marisa Stolzfus, your HROD executive expert, bringing you more than 25 years of experience, and I will be hosting this webinar series. In our previous webinar series, The Art of Effective Management, we focused on those functions that contribute to high-performing managers. The art of effective leadership takes the manager's skills to the next level, providing the crossover and differences between managing work and leading people. In this series, we'll share bits of knowledge, some tips, and a few tools that will help you navigate the differences between management and leadership. While this series is not a comprehensive training, we will explore the various functions of leadership and share a few key takeaway ideas for you to consider on your professional journey. Today's session will focus on motivating teams for high performance. Feel free to participate actively by entering questions or comments in the chat during this session. And now, here's Dr. Myra Austin, CEO and founder of Management Q's, to walk us through today's content. Dr. Myra, all yours.
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. I'm always taken aback by the amazing introductions, Marisa. Thank you. So to share a little bit with you about us, we both bring about more than 2 decades of experience to the table in our given areas. So my experience really comes from management and operations. I'm a management enthusiast, a champion for you managers out there. And boy, do I love advocating for you and your experience. And Marisa is one of the leading HR partners I've ever had the pleasure of partnering with. She really understands the disposition of the manager and the day-to-day type of support that a manager requires to succeed. And so she serves as an advocate for you too. So like she said, please make sure to ask questions, send us emails. We'd love to be here as a resource and support as we move through these informational webinars. So a little bit about Management Q's. So Management Q's is a management training and development company, and we do things a little bit differently. So we are backed by neuroscience, and our approach to training has been proving to work and increase retention in subject matter areas. And so our approach to breaking things down, making them digestible, and really helping managers realize how important they are in an organization is part of the magic we bring to the table. Okay. So today we are going to get into a really great topic. We're going to be talking about motivating teams for high performance. So we've all heard these terms. We've all heard motivation. We've all heard performance. What gets lost in the minutia of it all is how to get that to work with so many different types of people and with all of the things that managers are responsible for. And so today we're going to go through a topic breakdown. We're going to go through takeaways. We're going to speak to some resources, and then we'll do Q&A if there's any questions. And then I'll hand it back to Marisa to do our closeout. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, so starting with motivation. So the very base of understanding motivation starts with us understanding that it's an internal thing. Okay, it's not something you could purchase. It's not something you can just request. It's not something you can wish really hard for and it's going to happen. None of that is true of motivation. It is enthusiasm for doing something, right? It's a feeling like happy, right? Like the feeling of being happy and energized about something. In the workplace, motivation is the level of excitement, enthusiasm, and energy team members bring to their role. Okay. So I think one of the biggest takeaways is that part of leading is being able to motivate people, to stir them up inside. And so that takes a level of awareness. And as we go through today's session, you'll get to see that there's specifics that you need to be aware of as a manager and a leader in order to motivate people. Okay. So we're going to start with the skills required to motivate, because I always like to make things really digestible for our managers so that managers can recognize, okay, I need to work on that, or I'm really good at this, I'm not so great at that. And then you can start to pinpoint the areas that are really going to make a difference for you in the workforce. And so these are some of the skills needed to motivate people: empathy, positive attitude, reliability, goal setting, persistence, team building, communication, effective feedback, active listening, and delegation. So these are all the skills embedded in what ultimately creates for a motivated situation, right?
Yeah.
Anything to add there on the skills, Marisa?
I I would add one more thing, and that's advocacy,
Yeah.
right? You need to advocate for your team members. They're trusting you to be the voice for their goals, their ambitions, their concerns, etc. So yeah, that's a big one.
It is a big one. And so I will add to Marisa's great point there. When you advocate for your people, they feel seen, they feel heard, and they feel like you care. That's where they start to feel that motivation to do better because they feel represented. So
Yeah,
great.
they feel safe too, right?
Yeah,
Hmm.
great point there. Okay, keeping with the theme here that motivation is an internal thing, right? It's not this external thing that you can bring to the table. Motivational leadership is this. So motivational leadership is driving a team to give their absolute best. It's not um, something that can just be automatically done. Okay. It's setting direction, it's fueling passion. What are they passionate about? It's encouraging team members to be the best that they can be individually and collectively as a contributor in the team. So it's both. It's creating an environment where people feel seen, valued, and heard, like we've mentioned, and it's being excited to be there. So, a good question for you to ask yourself right now is: are my team members excited to be a part of this mission? Are they excited to be part of this team? Are they excited to partner with me as their leader and manager? These are good leadership questions to ask because getting real honest with ourselves is what gets us to the point of effectiveness.
So before you move on, can you go back to that
Yes,
slide again,
ma'am.
Dr. Paul? I love the picture, right? The picture exemplifies the diversity that exists in an organization. And it is a wonderfully diverse world, which means as managers, you have to know what's important to each and every team member because each and every team member is unique and they have a different set of values, a different background, a different series of experiences that will motivate, that will contribute to how they are motivated.
Yeah, great point. And the concept of being heard and seen, right? It only works when you're consistent with that approach throughout your team and your group. To Marisa's point, acknowledging you have these differences at the table and that they're a positive contribution that will create that intrinsic inner feeling of let's do this, let's get this done, we can do it, right? It's those types of moments that really generate that feeling of feeling motivated. So, leadership motivational strategies. So, sometimes we overthink things as leaders and as managers. And the reality is that it takes a human approach to create and set motivation in the environment. So, learn about the psychology behind the team member, their individual motivation. Get to know what they enjoy, what they're good at, what they're passionate about, and that'll help you be a better leader and manager in guiding their trajectory. Learn about your team members' needs, examine company culture, right? Understand the impact company culture may be having on individual team members' motivation and the group as a whole. And those are two separate things. So as a manager and a leader, it's good to pause and say, okay, well, this team member is doing well, they're motivated, but my team, not so much, right? Because then you have to take a look at how do you change and shift that dynamic. You want to know and share your vision. So as a leader, you need to know where you're headed, where the company is headed, and where you're taking this team because they're looking to you, right? And so develop your own self-awareness that's very motivational for people because they start to see that you're not perfect. You recognize it. You're going to have that kind of grace towards them too. Right. And so it creates that motivational space and that feeling of safety that Marisa mentioned. It comes from, doing and setting the example, but also that applies in showing and giving yourself grace because you're human and you can make mistakes. Right. So that is a motivational factor too. You want to become an effective communicator. So you want to make sure that you communicate clearly. If you make mistakes in your communication, that you apologize for not being clear. Those types of things motivate people to continue to work on their communication too. And so it's motivating in that way. You want to foster a positive environment. So don't use negative language. I think that sometimes we think negative language refers to maybe cursing, but it's not that. It's the negative. Oh, that sucks. I don't want to do that. That's terrible. I hate this part. It's those kinds of words that are charged and chip away at what other people feel. So be self-aware in that instance. Build rapport and trust with everyone. As a manager and a leader, you're building with everybody, whether you like them or not. And there's always going to be people that we sync up better than with others. So as a leader, you're building with everybody, right? So you see the bigger picture. Give team members ownership of their tasks. Let them step into their power, empower them to do so. That's highly motivating. There's nothing so damaging to motivation than micromanaging. Micromanaging will just kill motivation because there's no empowerment, there's no inspiration, there's no trust, and that's the message that you're sending with micromanagement. So this is probably my favorite slide for today, and it is 5 types of motivation. So as leaders, as managers, we should be aware that there are 5 types of motivation to begin with. And so intrinsic motivation is this type of motivation that comes from within the team member, right? From the person themselves, it's coming from them. Extrinsic motivation is the type of motivation that's external, and it's usually associated with rewards and recognition, right? So when you reward somebody, you recognize them, that creates a feeling of motivation. Affiliative motivation, this is the motivation from building a positive relationship. So that's one that I think people get blindsided on this one, I would say, not realizing the power that the relationship has on how motivated an individual feels. So the relationship that you have with your team has an impact directly with motivation and how they're performing, right? Your relationship with that person. Transformational motivation. This type of motivation comes from a compelling vision and a sense of purpose. So when we talk about being clear, setting the direction, knowing where you're leading your team, that's the type of motivation that creates that transformational motivation. You want to be part of it because they're going somewhere you've never been, or they're accomplishing something they've never accomplished. That's transformative motivation. And then there's transactional motivation. And this kind of motivation can be misused and can be high if you're too skewed towards management and have an absence of leadership. Okay. And this is the type of motivation that comes from reward and punishment, right? So you do good, you reward, but if they don't do good, you punish. So that's a transactional motivation. And I would encourage people to not skew in that direction. It has lasting consequences. And in our work with neuroscience, it has a lasting effect. It creates neural pathways that actually stick with the person for a very long time. Okay. So think about the consequences, about how you want to create action in your environment. Any thoughts on the 5 types, Marisa?
Blowing my mind right now with this
Oh,
information.
good.
This is great information. And I love your recommendation regarding the transactional motivation. right? Because this is sometimes with the punishment piece, we beat people down instead of lifting them up and helping them to be better. So I really appreciate that insight. Thank you, Dr. Myra.
Yeah, you're welcome. And keep this in mind, managers and leaders out there. We shouldn't be punishing because people are not our kids. We're talking about adult to adult relationships. So I have a whole compliance training around that related to progressive discipline, but there's a distinction there. So if we're talking from one adult to another, we should really move away from transactional because the exchange of value should be a little bit more sophisticated. So just keep that in mind as we're moving through motivations. I think that the former four is where you want to focus your energy. Okay. Okay. So there's a theory behind motivational leadership, and it's called motivation theory of leadership. And it is a concept that explores leaders and how they can motivate and drive team members, right? How through your action you can create an outcome of motivation, right? So how you could generate that kind of feeling. And it draws from multiple leadership theories. And so some of these theories, if you're not familiar with, I encourage you guys to Google them, read about them, see which sits with you the best or which you feel is needed in your environment. But some of those theories are Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is a very popular theory. A lot of people are familiar with that. Herzberg's two-factor theory and the expectancy theory. And so the motivation theory of leadership kind of takes from these three different theories. My recommendation is as managers and leaders to look these up. It's so easy to get information nowadays. You don't even have to read an entire book to get kind of the gist of what these theories are, but it'll help you see just how elevated and sophisticated motivation can be, and what you can start shifting and changing to help your team feel energized and excited about what they're involved in. And the reality is that in the workforce, we're doing amazing things, even if you're creating bottles, even if you're creating bottle caps. What's happening in the workforce between each of you, that's the magic. And that's where the impact is. And we can change lives by understanding how motivation works. Okay. So it involves understanding the individual and collective motivation. I think that's one of the recurring distinctions in our session today is pay attention not only to is one person motivated, but is your team collectively motivated? Because that's where you start to think strategically and take it to the next level. So these are some common mistakes. So if you're currently experiencing these or if you're witnessing these, now you know, and this should be a validating slide of what's good and what's bad in relation to motivation, okay? So this is a good checklist, right? If there's a lack of recognition, if there's inconsistent communication, if there's micromanagement in the environment, if feedback is being ignored at any level, if it's being ignored, it's going to have the opposite effect of motivation, right? If there are unclear goals and expectations, being busy is not the same as being effective or being productive, right? So if people are just moving around, but the goals are clear, the expectation of roles is unclear, that's not going to help or aid in motivation because there's confusion, right? Neglecting professional development. If team members have been in an organization for 20 years and have never received training, they've been stuck. They've been a bottleneck to their organization for that long. There's no motivation in that. There's no growth. There's no continuous improvement. There's no operational excellence, right? All of those things require continuous learning and growing and adapting. Not leading by example. If we're telling people feel motivated, and that's our idea of motivation, that is not how that works. That is not how that works. You have to lead by example, do things that motivate you, do things that excite you, do things that energize you. And by relation, people will be excited. By relation, people will be energized and will be interested in sharing with you what makes them tick. right? Because they see that you're excited about your own experience within that environment. Overlooking work-life balance, we're a whole person. So we need to include in our dynamic of leadership and management everything that makes us whole, right? So that includes time with our families because that resets us, that makes us happy, makes us healthy. Time exercising, if that's what you want to do, right? If that makes you healthier, better. All of those things are critical to motivation. A tired, burnt out person who hasn't spent time with their loved ones is not going to come to work feeling like they want to motivate other people. It's very logical, right? That outcome, expecting an outcome from that situation that is motivating is not logical.
Well, that intrinsic motivation won't be there if
No.
you can't bring yourself to a place where you're excited and you want to be productive. There's no way you're going to be able to do it for others.
There's no way. And you can pretend for a little bit, and there's people that do, right? In environments where you just want to push through. But when something needs to be generated from your being, it can't be forced. And so it never works. It's short-lived, and it ultimately doesn't result in the outcomes that we want from people. Okay. And then failure to address poor performance. There's a great quote, a famous quote, and I'm not sure right now who says it, but the worst thing you could do to a good employee is tolerate a bad one, right? That sends a message that you just don't care. And who wants to work for somebody who does not care? What encourages you to want to do better in that situation? So we have to be careful to not be avoidant as managers and leaders, to address problems promptly and effectively, okay, and to provide a way, a path to remedy it. Because if we don't do that, what we're saying to the rest of the population is this is how mistakes will be handled. And that is the opposite of motivation. If anything, it strikes fear. Who is more productive when they're fearful? Zero people. I'll tell you that much, because that's how we work. We can't be forced, right? As much as we have rules and policies and protocols in the workforce, leadership is about influence, right? Like we discussed in our first session. And so forcing these types of things actually works against our leadership output. Okay. Any thoughts there, Marisa?
Yeah, addressing poor performance really does motivate the team, but it can also motivate the individual, right? So poor performance addressing it doesn't always mean you're going to fire someone. It doesn't always mean that you're going to put somebody in the corner, right? There's a way to address poor performance that can be motivating. So, and I know it's not easy. It's very easy for me to talk about this, not easy in practice. But managers, this is a place where you really need to develop your skill. It's an art, and quite frankly, it's a lot of what is challenging, not just for managers, but for the individuals that are in that situation.
Yeah, agreed. And so the message there is you want to address things constructively. You want to move away from punishment. When you're addressing poor performance, should it be addressed? 100%. Should it be documented? Absolutely. Should there be a path? Yes, there should be, because it's not just the person that you're redirecting. It's not just the poor performance that you're addressing. It's also the path that you're creating for everybody else who is watching how you're handling it. That's why this potential motivation mistake is linked to motivation. It's because you're also sending a message to everybody. So you want to be cautious with what that message is. Okay. Okay, let's keep going here. Okay, let's see. Here we go. There we go. So I have some examples for you guys today because I think it really drives the point home of what it looks like to be a motivating leader, right? And so these are examples that are common in the workforce, and maybe we take them for granted because we don't see the distinction. So example one is focusing solely on monetary rewards. Okay, so here's the mistake in just focusing there. Relying exclusively on financial incentives can overlook other important motivational factors. So we've talked about motivational factors being intrinsic, right? And generating an energy, a feeling. So job satisfaction, recognition, and work-life balance are things that can be associated with financial areas, but aren't completely made up of financial factors, right? And so the solution there is, while fair compensation is important and it is one of the top motivators out there, if you look at the survey, so the data backs it up, you also want to focus on intrinsic motivators. Create a supportive work environment, recognize achievements, and offer opportunities for meaningful work. So, meaningful work, I would say there's a whole strategy behind providing meaningful work. And I think that it's definitely a blind spot for folks. But meaningful works means it's work that's going to take the team member down a path, incorporates growth and development, and ultimately helps them achieve their individual goal, right? So when we as leaders, as we're hiring, as we're promoting, as we're engaging people in the workforce, if we're not thinking about this factor, we're going to fall short with just offering a financial incentive. It won't be enough. Any
Yeah,
thoughts from an HR
yeah,
perspective?
absolutely. Like you're talking about establishing a sense of pride, right? Pride in what I do, pride in the team I work with, pride in the company I work for. So, that's where you're headed with this. And that's a really powerful notion.
Yeah, so here's another example, micromanagement, and one of my favorite, because as an operator, it's easy to become a micromanager if you're not self-aware. And so here's the mistake with micromanaging. Micromanaging can stifle creativity and autonomy, making employees feel mistrusted and disengaged. So when you micromanage, you make the person you're managing feel like they're not worthy of trust. And that's the message that you're sending, that they're falling short, that they can't do it. So think about the neural pathways that creates, right? Because we link things back to neuroscience at management cues. It creates deeply embedded neural pathways and behavior that results from it. It's pretty intense if you break it down that way. So the solution is this: trust your employees to complete their tasks, provide guidance and support, but allow them the freedom to approach their work in their own way. Let them get creative with it and get feedback, learn from them, be open to learning from other people, regardless of how much experience you have. Focus on outcomes rather than processes. Okay, so processes, I'll say this, to me, they are important as an operator. And I understand that there are controls in place to mitigate risk, not to control people. And that's the distinction of a leader, right? The leader is making that distinction. The manager in me recognizes the value of the controls. Okay. Okay, so our third example for today, and I think this is our last example for this brief session because we're almost at time: ignoring employee feedback. The mistake is this: dismissing or ignoring feedback from employees can lead to a disconnect between leadership, staff, reducing morale and motivation. People feel ignored, they feel neglected when you do that. And so even if you're not going to adopt feedback, talk about it. So the solution is this: actively seek and genuinely consider employee feedback. Implement changes when possible, and it's not always possible. So acknowledging feedback is what you want to do, even if you don't use it. And communicate how feedback is being used to improve the workplace. One thing that I often do is I'll explain why I'm not using it and the logic behind it.
Yep.
Yep. And that's what makes it effective. All right. Okay, so going into key takeaways and heading towards our closeout, these are the key takeaways for today. Workplace motivation refers to enthusiasm, energy, and excitement that is brought to the role. Okay, motivational skills are part of leadership and realizing that leadership function. So if you're short on motivation, that's the area you want to work for to get to your leadership capacity. Okay. Motivational theory of leadership has to do with understanding how to motivate and drive team members in their roles. And leaders and managers can make motivational mistakes. So it's important to recognize what those mistakes can look like in the workplace environment. Okay. So just be cognizant that you can push motivation in the wrong direction. Thinking of motivation as a strategy can help leaders and managers engage with intent and purpose-driven energy, right? Don't take motivation on like a burden, because it shouldn't be. It's really about connecting these human factors and enjoying what we're doing with our teams. Okay. There are 5 types of motivation: intrinsic, extrinsic, affiliative, transformational, and transactional. Okay, with that said, I will bump it right back to you, Marisa.
Awesome. So as we conclude today's session, I hope you feel motivated to think and consider these functional areas where you excel in them, and to leverage that leadership skill while also considering the function of leadership or the motivational factor that you would like to further develop. To help revisit this content, the recording of this webinar and the deck will be emailed to all participants and follow-up. You can also find additional resources, including management planners and some other tools to support your ongoing development at managementcues.org. We'll continue the Art of Effective Leadership series on Tuesday, the 28th, noon Pacific. Connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube to stay updated on future events, revisit past sessions, submit questions, and share any feedback that you might have. Thank you for being part of the Art of Effective Leadership series. We'll look forward to seeing you again next week, and have a great holiday day off. Talk to you soon. Bye.